Hello and welcome to Encore. Coming up in today's show. A 19th century heroine battles provincial boredom, dabbles in adultery and ends up with blood on her hands. She sounds like a literary archetype, but new film Lady Macbeth is inspired by a Russian novel that you've probably never heard of. This debut feature has been making a splash at festivals. Its director William Oldroyd joins us in the studio to tell us more. William, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Your film is called The Young Lady here in France, but in its English title, it's Lady Macbeth. We immediately think of the Shakespearean character, but it's not exactly about her. So can you tell us about the relationship between these two Lady Macbeths separated by 2.5 centuries?
I think that originally Nikolai Leskov, who wrote the book Lady Macbeth of Mtsensk, wanted to call his central character Katherine in the book, but Katherine in our film, Lady Macbeth, because he couldn't understand how a woman could do such despicable things without being like the heroine of the play Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, that we know from that play. However, we sort of have revised that slightly, and we think that a woman can do these things without being like that person who is unsexed and filled with direst cruelty, as Shakespeare puts it. And that's why we continue to keep the title in England. But for a French audience, I think it's called The Young Lady, so there's absolutely no doubt that it is not the Shakespeare.
So it's not the same cultural references. Now
No.
You have a fantastic leading lady in Florence Pugh. Let's take a look at her in the role of Lady Macbeth.
My father bought you. You think me to be stupid? You will alter your behavior.
You're home.
You've acted so very shamelessly and so very stupidly. You will never see that man again.
Now, Katerina, or Katherine, is a very strong central character, but she's not as well known as other heroines like Madame Bovary or Anna Karenina. Why do you think history has forgotten her somewhat?
Well,
Literary history.
Well, literary history, yeah, because she was quite well captured in the opera that Shostakovich wrote the music for. And I don't know, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, that opera was banned by Stalin, I think, because he didn't like her very much. He thought that maybe what she did was too violent or was sort of, you know, not what women should do. And that was exactly the reason that we decided we wanted to make a film about her, because so many women of literally of that period, as you say, you know, like Nora, for example, or Hedda in Hedda Gabler, they kill themselves or they run away. But with Katherine, for us, what was fantastic is that she fought back. And we loved that sort of that boldness, and we were compelled to see her go through with that violence.
There's almost a feminist feel to this film because, like you say, she fights back. She doesn't feel subordinated, which is quite rare for a woman in the 19th century. Now, feminism is something we're talking a lot about now in culture and in politics. Where do you think we are with that battle at the moment?
Well, I don't know. I was asked this question in America on the day that Donald Trump was inaugurated. You know, what progress has been made since 1865? And, you know, in that period, for us, it was important because it wasn't until later that women were actually able to own property in their own right and weren't the property of their husbands. So there has been some progress made, obviously, but at the same time, I was asked that question on a day where a man who had publicly humiliated women, you know, and also done so in private, you know, in terms of the allegations, as you know, was voted to arguably the highest position in the world. So, I mean, I think it's a debate that's still ongoing.
Now, making a period drama like this one, 19th century setting, it can be something of a poisoned chalice, somewhere like the UK, where they can be very successful, but then there are all these clichés of bonnets and corsets and a certain kind of tone. You've definitely moved away from that in your film. How did you achieve that through the direction, the aesthetics?
Well, it was one of the advantages of having a small budget, actually, was that we were really forced to focus on what we needed. We had to prioritise what were the things that we absolutely needed to tell this story. And so we decided that actually somebody like Katherine was probably very similar in nature to a young woman in 2017. That actually, you know, those things that we think about Victorian England, well, actually, if we were to investigate her private life, and we see Katherine in the bedroom, we see her with Sebastian, we see all those things that a young woman goes through in 1865, probably not very different. So we could strip back a lot of what we would think of as the trappings of period drama that we had come to associate with those TV adaptations that I grew up on.
Now, this is your first feature film. Your background is predominantly in theatre on some very prestigious stages, the Young Vic, the Sadler's Wells. Let's take a look at a production of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, which you worked on with Deborah Warner.
I did love thee, Caesar. Oh, 'tis true. If then thy spirit look upon us now, shall it not grieve thee dearer than thy death to see thy Antony making his peace, shaking the bloody fingers of thy foes, most noble in the presence of thy cause? Had I as many eyes as thou hast wounds, weeping as fast as they stream forth thy blood, it would become me better than to close in terms of friendship with thine enemies. Pardon me, Julius.
Now, 400 years after Shakespeare's death, his plays are still being very widely performed, but there's always this worry that they're not going to be accessible for the next generation. Now, as a director, how do you manage to bring them up to date, make them relevant for today's audiences?
Well, I think the temptation is to try and just throw everything out and actually try and, you know, dumb down. And I would say that's not the way to do it. I think that actually, if you treat audiences with integrity and intelligence and actually really think about the plays, what they're saying, an audience will catch up. I mean, there's a great fear. I think also we're spoon-fed Shakespeare. It's like a sort of, we think that it's sort of, well, it's a rite of passage in schools, isn't it? You have to go through these things. But actually, some of the best productions that I've seen, and they're usually from European directors, they treat the text with a sort of irrelevance as well, and that can be very, very interesting. That you've got the sort of to treat it with respect and actually to try and understand what Shakespeare's trying to say, but also then to find the form, really change the form, and that I think can often allow an audience to access it in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Now, an important part of your transition from stage to screen was via a short film, which was called Best in 2013. That made a very big impression at the festivals around the world. Let's take a short look.
You can't keep her waiting any longer. You got the ring? Of course I have. Let's go, baby. When my dad dies, I'll end it. No, you won't. You'll always be the best.
So when you found yourself behind a camera instead of in a theatre, what was the biggest challenge or surprise for you technically?
I think one of the biggest things I found, one of the greatest challenges, was actually realising that in the theatre, as an audience member, you sit in the auditorium and you are able to choose where you want to look on stage. So the audience sort of self-edit, if you like. But for cinema, as a film director, I had to make that decision for the audience. So I was choosing where to put the camera, and most importantly, why. And of course, there are a million places you could place a camera with different results, and actually that was the hardest thing for me to work out. Why am I going to put the camera here at this point to capture this thing? And so that process took a long time for me to begin to understand, and it's still ongoing.
It's a different way of visual storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I believe your film, Lady Macbeth, was filmed in the north of England with mainly a British cast and crew, predominantly.
Yeah.
How do you think British cinema's doing right now, and where do you think it's going?
Well, I think it's very healthy. Yeah, I mean, I think that actually schemes like iFeatures, which is how we made Lady Macbeth, which promote first-time filmmakers, British filmmakers, and seek to make films in the region. So Lady Macbeth was made in Durham and in Newcastle. The Levelling was made in Somerset, and Apostasy was made in Manchester. You know, I think it's fantastic that we're actually now reaching out to those regional agencies like Northern Film and Media, who helped us a great deal to make this film, and using the money that we received through the government to actually put it into those communities and into those areas, and then use the great resource of, for example, the north of England to make our film.
Hopefully we'll be seeing a lot more of it. Now, we asked you about your cultural highlight of the moment, as we do all of our guests. You flagged up a photography exhibition taking place here in Paris. An artist who worked with both moving images, like yourself, and also stills, Elie Lothar. Now, his photographs from the first half of the 20th century are very difficult to categorise. What inspired you about them?
Well, actually, a few years ago, I went to Aubervilliers, and because a friend of mine was rehearsing a play there called Les Justes, and I noticed the area was quite different to the centre of Paris, not being from Paris myself. It was very interesting. So to go to the exhibition and then to see how he had made this short documentary about Aubervilliers, I think it must have been in the 40s, was so interesting because it really was a slum in those times. And actually watching people picking coal off the street and putting it into the baskets and so on, and then seeing people making caustic soda with their hands and how they're breathing it in. I mean, people were really, really destitute in that time, but he caught real character. I thought that was fantastic. And also his eye was very interesting. So there was the subject. He knew that those people, where they were living and what was going on. But actually the way where he put his camera to get a more unusual and what you might say avant-garde sort of perspective was really, really interesting, and I thought was good to see.
A very new perspective on the City of Lights then. William Oldroyd, thanks so much for joining us today. Lady Macbeth is being released here in France under the title The Young Lady, and Elie Lotar's photographs are on show at Paris's Jeux de Paume Gallery until May 28th. We'll leave you with a short selection of those images. Remember to check out our website, and you can also keep up with Encore on our social media channels. Stay tuned to France 24 for more news coming up just after this.